Rahul Soni, who has given classics a contemporary twist. He will be in conversation with Maitreyee Chowdhury to talk about his work in this field. Welcome to the festival.
This morning, welcome to Bangalore Poetry Festival. We are, of course, going to discuss Magad, the classic, by Shrikant Verma, in the larger framework of translation. I'd like to start off with a little anecdote. Sometime in the early 2013-14, when I was researching my own book on the Hungarialists, a poetry revolution, I wanted to read up a little bit about Nai Kavita. Those of you who read Hindi poetry will be familiar with Nai Kavita. And I was recommended a book by Shrikant Verma called Magad. And as I was flipping through this book, the older edition has the Hindi poem on one side and the English ones on the other side. As someone who does choti moti shaukiana taur pe translations from Bangla to English, I was drawn towards the translation, not only for the precision of the words, but the lyrical ability and the very lucid thought process. That was my first introduction to Rahul Soni. Ladies and gentlemen, the translator, writer Rahul himself.
Thank you, Maitreyee. That was a generous introduction. Could I ask for these lights to be turned off, please? I will get a headache in 2 minutes. Thank you. Yeah.
So, Rahul, last year, I think, the new edition of the translated version of Magad came out. But I've just sort of browsed through the translations for the latest edition, that is. And the copies are outside. If any of you are interested, you can buy them. So what first strikes you about this translation of this really classic work by Shrikant Verma is the lucidity with which Rahul has approached the text. Not only the lucidity, also the precision. It's like a tunnel vision that he has created, keeping in mind the larger framework intact. So, getting down to the basics, Rahul, how did you approach the translation, please?
Before that, I think it might be useful to speak about what Magad is exactly and who Shrikant Verma was. In Hindi, there was a movement of poetry called the Nai Kavita, starting in the 60s, which kind of departed from the older, more ornate, ornamental style of poetry towards a more conversational, direct form. And Shrikant Verma was one of the pioneers of that movement. Parallel to that, there was a similar movement in prose, which was called the Nai Kahani. Nirmal Verma is one of the main exponents of that one. Magad is widely considered to be Shrikant Verma's masterpiece. It came out in 1984, and I don't think there was anything like that in Hindi poetry before. It is a very extremely pared down style, and yet it is very elusive. It uses names from history, from mythology, to create this aura of a past that was glorious, that is in decline, that is no longer there, something that we are all searching for. This sense of loss of something glorious and great pervades the poems. And it is this sense of loss, I think, this deep, deep sense of loss that first drew me to the poems themselves. And that is what. So I was not a translator when or I did not think of myself as a translator when I began working on this. I felt at that point when I discovered these poems, I felt that there was something I could learn from them, something that I could learn for my own writing, bring into my own writing from them. And that is what led me to this process of trying to create them in English or recreate them in English. And I think that is why, as we were speaking earlier, Maitreyee, I think there is a personal element to how those poems have turned out. I feel these translations are not just translations; they're equally my poems. And I began them as such, just trying to write these poems in English, which is the language I write in. In later stages, at later revisions, I of course then started to go back to the originals and see how I had departed from them, or how I could get closer to the sense of the text, to the play of language in those poems in Hindi. And that is what I think drew me closer back to the source, as it were.
Rahul, like we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that the changes that came about in the new edition, happened very organically, and also because of certain realizations, like you said, going closer to the text in a sort of way. So do you think, in that sense, translation, very much like, especially that of poetry translation, is also very much like writing original poetry, where you like any good poet is constantly trying to find the right, a better word, a righter word maybe, if pardon the jargon, a more nuanced take. In that sense, do you feel translation is also evolving, constantly?
I mean, absolutely. I don't think translation can be separated or considered a distinct thing from quote-unquote original writing. This is equally original writing, and it evolves. And the writer, the translator, they evolve in the course of time, and their craft evolves. And so revisiting this 10 years later, I found myself in a different space as well. My understanding had changed. Perhaps my craft had become better, I don't know. And that all of that has a bearing on the new versions that you see. Yeah.
Would you like to read something, that, especially a poem maybe that sort of is in the older version, and now in a slightly different form in the newer version?
Yeah, we'll come to that, I think. But before that, I'd like to just read maybe the couple of introductory poems, which will just give a sense of the mood of the collection. So I'll read a pair of poems. The first is called Magad, and the second is called The People of Magad. Magad. Listen, horseman, where is Magad? I have come from Magad. I must go to Magad. Where do I turn? North or south? East or west? Here I see Magad. Here it disappears. Just yesterday I left Magad. Just yesterday Magad's people told me not to leave Magad. I gave my word. I'd be back before sunrise. But there is neither Magad nor Magad. You too have been searching, brothers. This is not the Magad you've read about in books. This is the Magad that you, like me, have lost. The people of Magad. The people of Magad are sorting the bones of the dead. Which ones are Ashokas and Chandraguptas? No, these can't be Bimbisaras, they are Ajatashatrus. The people of Magad say and shed tears. It's natural. Those who have seen a man alive, only they will see him dead. Those who haven't seen the living, how can they see the dead? Just yesterday, the people of Magad saw Ashoka going to Kalinga, returning from Kalinga. Chandragupta riding his horse to Takshashila, Bimbisara in tears, Ajatashatru flexing his muscles. The people of Magad had seen, and they can't forget that they had seen those who can no longer be found.
Like you, all of you just heard the poem, and you must have noticed that Shrikant Verma often uses a particular word in different ways. There's a lot of punning happening, there's a lot of refrain, there's some lyricality also in his poems. Rahul, I'd like to ask you, the text is very subtle and understated in tone, in tonality, in terms of both politics and philosophy, death, angst, all of that. How, for those who here maybe who are interested in translating themselves, can you probably shed some light in that direction of how to go about translating something that is so layered and so subtle in nature? I know it's a personal journey for you, and for each translator it's a personal journey, but maybe little tidbits?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, one works on one's craft over many years, and as I was saying earlier, one's understanding changes and develops. In context of Magad, it might just be useful to speak a little more about the context the poems emerged from. And the reason why this new edition came into being at this point. Shrikant Verma, besides being a magnificent poet, also eventually ended up being a politician, and a major politician at that. He was the spokesperson of the Congress party when emergency happened, and emergency is of course widely thought to be one of the darkest periods of democracy. And he found himself in a position of justifying that to the people, to the world at large. While privately, I think he was, and Magad, the poems are evidence of that he was grappling with his conscience. This got published in 1986. Most of the poems are written in 1979 and 84. And it is my guess, it's purely speculation of course, but my feeling is that he only felt that he could publish this sort of mea culpa, this confession, once Indira Gandhi was no longer around. And while Magad can't be reduced to its specific circumstances, like any great work of art, it does have a bigger reach. It's also inseparable from that. And those of us who have been seeing what's been happening around us over the past 10 years or so, we've also realized that politics is inescapable. It has a very real bearing on our lives. And that has had, I think, an effect on, a subtle effect on how I approached this new version, and some of the smaller changes that happened in word choice, in my realization of what the poem would actually have meant, as opposed to my earlier reading of it. In light of that, there is a poem I would, I think, like to read first in the Hindi. Kosal, of course, being one of the great kingdoms of ancient times, one of the Mahajanpads. Also the kingdom where Ram hailed from. And like many other poems in the collection, this takes on the voice of a commoner or a courtier. In this case, it's a courtier who is addressing the king. बाहर तो निकलिए महाराज, बाहर आपकी कीर्ति चंद्रिका की तरह खिली हुई है। सभी सुखी हैं, कोई नहीं कहता मुझे कुछ कहना है। कुछ हुआ है, कोई कुछ भी नहीं कहता, सहमा रहता है। कहने के नाम पर इतना कहता है मैं सुखी हूं। महाराज, बिना कहे कोई किस तरह सुखी रह सकता है, सोचा है आपने? वैसे तो कीर्ति महाराज की चंद्रिका की तरह खिली हुई है, कहने को हो भी क्या सकता है। पर इतना अवश्य कहूंगा, जो सोचता है बकता है, उसका बकना शैली बन जाता है। दुख है कौशल की अब तक शैली नहीं बन पाई। जो भी हो आप तो बाहर निकलिए, भीड़ संवेद कह रही है सुखी हैं हम। महाराज, जितना वे कहते हैं आप भी उतना ही कहिए, प्रजाजन सुखी रहिए। So the satirical tone is very evident here. But what threw me when I started translating these back in 2008-9 were these lines. इतना अवश्य कहूँगा, जो सोचता है बकता है, उसका बकना शैली बन जाता है. What could bakna mean in this context? And this baffled me, and this bafflement shows in the translation I did back then in the first edition. But this much I will say, those who think jabber on, and their gibberish becomes a style, which honestly makes no sense to me, and it's one of the more obvious failings of the previous version. Approaching them in 2013, which is when the new edition was done, it became crystal clear. And so I'll read the new version of the poem in its entirety in English. The style of Kosal. Come outside, Maharaj. Outside, your glory spreads like moonlight. Everyone is happy. No one says, I have something to say. Something has happened. No one says anything. They are all afraid. If ever they speak, they only say, I am happy. Maharaj, haven't you wondered how anyone can be happy and not say a thing? Anyway, Maharaj's glory spreads like moonlight, so where is the need to say anything? But this much I will say, those who think speak out, and their speaking out becomes the style. The sad thing is that Kosal still does not have a style of its own. All the same, come outside. The crowd is saying in one voice, we are happy. Maharaj, as many times as they tell you, tell them, my people, stay happy.
Rahul, you mentioned about the politics, the context in which Magad was written. Now that we have the new edition out, and as you rightly said, it's also perhaps a product of the times that we are in a sort of inverted way maybe. And one really can't ignore that a text like Magad, where the name itself, Magad, and so many others, is actually a metaphor, a larger metaphor for what the poet is actually trying to say. And what is remarkable is, like Rahul has already mentioned, that it was written at a time where Shrikant Verma was a diplomat and on the side of the ruling party, and yet he came out and wrote something like this. My question to you here is, how do you see this as a metaphor for today's political climate? Magad is no longer really just the Magad there. It's transcended and it's become something else. How does it fit into the political climate? And what many of us are trying to say, Magad, Magad, Magad.
Yeah, I think what it does is speak to a larger cyclical version of history, and the fact that one might think that they're in the midst of a great civilization, or that there is this glorious thing that's surrounding them right now, but the inevitability, the only absolute certainty is death. It is a very nihilistic view, which is also what draws me to it. But there will be a fall, no matter what is happening around you. The only inevitable thing, and Shrikant Verma has said this himself elsewhere, it is about death beyond anything else. That is the only certainty, and everything will end. It's a dark view. It's a dark view of history. It's a dark view of human beings as well, I think. And I guess whatever is happening around the world, not just even in our part of it, bears it out. In that there's a poem that I would, I think, again, like to just read out here. It's one of my favorites from the collection. In Hindi, it's called Dharma Yudh. And we are seeing war everywhere around us and its various justifications. But what exactly is a just war? And that's how I've translated the title, A Just War. How is it possible for the number of dead to be the same on both sides? How is it possible for the flag to fall on both sides? For the widows on one side to outnumber the unwidowed on the other? How is it possible for the sorrow in one capital to equal the mourning in the other? That there be repentance on both sides, that there be dharma on both sides, that there be shame on both sides, that both sides lay down their arms, that both be victorious. I say, it is not possible. One-sided the murders, the victory, one-sided. One-sided the arrogance, the fear, one-sided. One-sided the widows, the unwidowed, one-sided. One-sided the sorrow, the mourning, one-sided. One-sided the joy, the repentance, one-sided. One-sided the dharma, the shame, one-sided. The number of dead on both sides is never the same.
Last question, Rahul. We are running out of time. So, moving away from your personal journey, maybe I'd like to ask you, for those here who would like to translate and translate more meaningfully than in terms of quantity, what would you say? Anyone here can understand the kind of translation that has been done here. So, just anything, just to sort of maybe a word to those who want to translate it. Dil se to, of course, but other than that.
Dil se is a much abused method, I think.
The technicality of it.
Translation, as we were even earlier saying, I think we can't separate it from writing. You have to be a writer. You have to be a very, very good writer to be able to translate.
In both the languages.
In both the languages, definitely in the language which you're translating into. It's also an act of reading, of interpretation, of reading very, very closely. So you have to be a great reader in the language you're translating from. And I guess for me, I think what is becoming primary is the reason to translate something. Why should one do it, or why would one want to translate something? And what sets Magad apart from some of the other things I've translated is the fact that my reasons for translating it were not extraneous, they were not outside of me. I found some resonance here, some similarity to something that I was attempting in my own work, and therefore this was something I wanted to learn from, which is what drove me to it, rather than say someone approaching me and saying, "Oh, won't you translate this?" or because it's a paid assignment or anything of that sort. I think that would be, I think, the main thing I would like to say here.
Does anyone want to ask anything?
Hello, so my name is Pratibha Kumar. See, sometimes what the original poet means, if he wanted to make it a stock, he would have said "bolna, jo bolta hai," but he said "jo bakta hai." So bakta hai is blabbering or chattering, showing off. But you made it talk. So that is where the nuances, get lost.
Well, I did not make it talk. I said speaking out, and bakna can be used, of course, in various ways in Hindi. It is a strongly worded speech of some sort, I would say. But you also have to make sense of it in the context of the poem and in the context that you're writing in. And that is, I think, what guided my choice to translate it as speaking out now, as opposed to gibberish earlier.
Also, ma'am, especially in the vernacular languages, one word can have, a very sort of layered meaning. If it's bakna is one thing, bakbakana is another thing. Right. So, when you move laterally that way, there has to be, so there are numerous options actually. for one bakna, there are some 10 words that can be used. But when you are within this framework or structure of a particular text, you have to sort of, pertain to that, have a tunnel vision for that, and put it in that context, I guess. That is what.
I am Anand. Yeah, I just wanted to say, there's a certain creative energy in the idea that a style forms out of gibberish, which I think is reflected in other poems in Magad, where he compares the sculptors of one state with another state. And, if Kosal has not formed its own style, it's because people are not doing enough bakna also. There's something creative about that. Whereas in the second translation, it feels more like a political statement.
That is an interesting point for sure. And yeah, it is a political statement in the second translation, of course.
And I prefer the first energy.
Yeah.
I think we've come to the end of this session. Thank you, Rahul, for being with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope you continue coming to the Poetry Festival for more and more sessions like this. Thank you for your participation.